USS Defiant, the Navy's $22 billion battleship that could change everything. The United States Navy hasn't built a battleship since 1944. That was the USS Missouri, the ship where Japan signed its official surrender, ending the Second World War. Missouri displaced 57,000 tons, carried 9 16-inch guns that could hurl 2,000-pound shells 23 miles, and required a crew of nearly 3,000 men. For 80 years after Missouri, the battleship was considered dead, a relic of a bygone era, replaced by aircraft carriers, guided missile destroyers, nuclear submarines, and precision cruise missiles. Military experts said the battleship would never return. The age of the big gunship was over. And then, in December 2025, the Navy announced it's building a new one. It's called USS Defiant. Hull classification BBG-1. It will displace over 35,000 tons, stretch nearly 900 feet long, and carry weapons that didn't exist 5 years ago, including hypersonic missiles traveling at Mach 5, an electromagnetic railgun, and directed energy laser systems powerful enough to shoot down missiles. The estimated cost for the lead ship? Somewhere between $14 billion and $22 billion, depending on who you ask. Is this the future of naval warfare, or the most expensive mistake in military history? Let's break it down. Every angle, both sides. You can decide for yourself. Before we start, subscribe if you're interested in naval technology and strategy. I'm covering every development in this program as it unfolds. On December 22, 2025, the announcement came from Mar-a-Lago. The President, the Secretary of War, and the Secretary of the Navy stood together and revealed the plan. The Navy would build a new class of battleships as the centerpiece of what they're calling the Golden Fleet, a sweeping program to expand and modernize the entire United States Navy. The initial plan calls for 2 ships, then 10, with an eventual target of 20 to 25 vessels in the class. The first ship, USS Defiant, hull number BBG-1, is planned to begin construction around 2030. The Secretary of the Navy described it as the most lethal and versatile warship anywhere on the world's oceans. A ship logo was displayed alongside the announcement, based on a famous photograph. The imagery was dramatic, the language was bold, and the ambition was enormous. But this ship didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew out of a problem. For several years, the Navy had been developing the DDG-X, a planned next-generation guided missile destroyer meant to eventually replace the aging Arleigh Burke class. The DDG-X was supposed to be bigger and more capable than anything currently in the fleet, but the designers ran into a wall. Senior Navy officials revealed that the DDG-X hull simply wasn't large enough to accommodate all the weapons the Navy wanted to put on it. Specifically, it couldn't carry enough vertical launch cells for the new conventional prompt strike hypersonic missile system, while also fitting the other sensors and weapons the Navy needed. The Navy considered building 2 different variants of the DDG-X to solve this problem, one optimized for one mission, one for another. But that would mean 2 separate production lines, increased costs, and reduced efficiency. When the administration expressed interest in building a modern battleship, the Navy saw an opportunity. Instead of 2 compromised destroyers, they could build one enormous ship that carries everything. A ship so large that the designers wouldn't have to make trade-offs. And that's how the DDG-X program was suspended and the BBG-X battleship program was born. Now let's talk specifications. Because regardless of whether you think this ship is a good idea, the technical details are genuinely impressive. The BBG-1 is projected to be between 840 and 880 feet long. To put that in perspective, that's nearly the length of 3 American football fields laid end to end. The beam, the width of the ship, will be between 105 and 115 feet. Full load displacement, over 35,000 tons, with some estimates suggesting it could reach 39,000 tons. Let me give you some comparisons so you can visualize the scale. The current workhorse of the surface fleet is the Arleigh Burke class destroyer. A Burke is about 509 feet long and displaces around 9,100 tons. The DDG-1 will be almost twice as long and nearly 4 times as heavy. The Zumwalt-class destroyer, the Navy's current largest surface combatant, is 610 feet long and displaces about 16,000 tons. The DDG-1 dwarfs even the Zumwalt. The Ticonderoga-class cruiser, which the DDG-1 is partly designed to replace, displaces about 9,600 tons. Again, the DDG-1 is in a completely different size category. The only U.S. Navy ships larger than the DDG-1 will be aircraft carriers. The Ford class displaces over 100,000 tons, so carriers are still significantly bigger. But among surface combatants, ships that fight on the surface rather than launch aircraft, the DDG-1 will be the largest American warship since World War II. For historical context, the Iowa-class battleships that the DDG-1 is spiritually succeeding displaced about 57,000 tons fully loaded. So the DDG-1 is actually considerably lighter than the old battleships, despite being almost as long. That's because it doesn't carry thousands of tons of heavy armor plate like the Iowas did. Now the weapons. This is where things get really interesting. The main missile battery consists of 128 Mark 41 vertical launch cells, distributed between the bow and stern of the ship. These are the same type of launcher used on current destroyers and cruisers, which means they're compatible with the entire existing inventory of Navy missiles: Tomahawks for land attack, Standard Missiles for air defense, ESSM for close-range air defense, and ASROC for anti-submarine warfare. 128 cells is a substantial increase over the 96 on an Arleigh Burke, or the 122 on a Ticonderoga cruiser. But the standard VLS cells are just the beginning. In addition, the DDG-1 will carry 12 dedicated cells for conventional prompt strike, the Navy's new hypersonic weapon system. CPS missiles travel at speeds exceeding Mach 5, that's over 3,800 miles per hour, and can strike targets at ranges of thousands of miles in a matter of minutes. These weapons are designed to hit time-sensitive, high-value targets that are too far away for conventional cruise missiles to reach quickly enough. The Zumwalt-class destroyers are currently being fitted with CPS capability, but they can only carry a limited number of the large missiles. The DDG-1's size allows it to carry a much more substantial hypersonic arsenal. Then there's the electromagnetic railgun. This is perhaps the most controversial element of the entire program. A railgun uses electromagnetic force instead of chemical propellant to accelerate a projectile to extreme velocities, in this case over Mach 6, or roughly 4,600 miles per hour. The projectile itself doesn't need explosive warhead. At those speeds, the kinetic energy alone is devastating, and because there's no gunpowder or rocket fuel involved, the ammunition is much cheaper and takes up less space than traditional missiles. The Navy's planned railgun for the DDG-1 is rated at 32 megajoules. To understand what that means, imagine the energy of a 1-ton truck traveling at 100 miles per hour, concentrated into a projectile the size of a loaf of bread. That's roughly the energy behind each shot. Here's the controversy. The U.S. Navy actually abandoned its own railgun program back in 2021 after spending over $500 million on development. The technology worked in laboratory settings but faced enormous challenges in terms of barrel durability, power generation, and rate of fire. But Japan picked up where the U.S. left off. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force successfully test-fired a naval railgun from one of their warships in October 2023, and they did it for just $6.5 million. General Atomics confirmed in January 2026 that discussions with the Navy about railgun integration for the DDG-1 have begun. So the railgun is back. Whether it will actually work at sea on a real warship in combat conditions remains an open and very expensive question. And then there are the directed energy weapons, military lasers. The BBG-1 is planned to carry laser systems in the 300 to 600 kilowatt range. To appreciate what that means, consider that the Helios laser system currently deployed on some Navy destroyers operates at about 60 kilowatts. The Odin system is even less powerful. The BBG-1's lasers would be 5 to 10 times more powerful than anything currently at sea. At 600 kilowatts, a laser can destroy incoming missiles, shoot down drones, disable small boats, and potentially even damage aircraft at significant ranges. And unlike missiles, a laser effectively has unlimited ammunition as long as the ship has electrical power. The cost per shot is negligible compared to firing a multi-million-dollar missile. This is one of the strongest arguments for the BBG-1's large size. Railguns and high-energy lasers require enormous amounts of electrical power. Current destroyers simply cannot generate enough electricity to operate these weapons while also running their sensors, combat systems, and propulsion. The BBG-1's sheer size allows for power generation capacity that smaller ships can't match. Rounding out the armament, 2 Mark 45 5-inch naval guns for surface bombardment and naval gunfire support, close-in weapon systems for terminal defense against missiles, and a flight deck and hangar capable of operating V-22 Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft and future vertical lift aircraft. The crew complement is estimated at 650 to 850 sailors. That's much larger than a destroyer's crew of around 300, but dramatically smaller than the nearly 3,000 men who crewed an Iowa-class battleship. Automation and modern systems reduce the manpower requirement significantly. Propulsion will be conventional, not nuclear. Gas turbines and diesel engines will drive an integrated electric propulsion system, similar in concept to the Zumwalt class. The ship is expected to be capable of speeds exceeding 30 knots. Now let's talk about why the Navy says it needs this ship, the case for the BBG-1. The first argument is the cruiser gap. The Navy's 22 Ticonderoga-class cruisers are being retired. These ships have served as the fleet's primary command and control platforms for over 3 decades, coordinating air defense for entire carrier strike groups. They carry the most powerful version of the Aegis combat system and serve as flagships for destroyer squadrons and carrier groups. As the Ticonderogas retire, the Navy loses that command capacity. No ship currently in production can replace it. The Arleigh Burke destroyers are capable ships, but they're smaller and weren't designed as flagships. The BBG-1 is designed to fill that command and control role and expand it dramatically. The director of surface warfare put it directly. There are some folks really hung up on the term battleship. This will be a battleship because she will be the most powerful warship in the world. The second argument is the firepower gap. The Navy's concept of operations calls for distributed maritime operations, spreading sensors and weapons across many platforms. But there's a practical problem. Current destroyers can't carry enough missiles, especially the very large hypersonic weapons. You need a bigger ship. The BBG-1 provides a platform that can carry a massive weapons load without the compromises required by smaller hulls. The third argument is about future weapons. Railguns and high-energy lasers have been stuck in development limbo, partly because no existing ship can generate enough electrical power to operate them. The BBG-1 finally makes these weapons viable by providing a platform with the size, power generation, and cooling capacity they require. In this view, the BBG-1 isn't just a warship. It's an enabler for an entirely new generation of naval weapons technology. The fourth argument is survivability. Unlike destroyers, which are relatively fragile, the BBG-1 is designed to absorb damage and continue fighting. One Navy official stated, "This ship is meant to take a hit, stay in the fight, and fight back." In an era of anti-ship missiles, having a ship tough enough to survive a hit and keep operating has real tactical value. Now let's hear from the critics, and there are many. The biggest concern, the elephant in the room, is cost. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that the lead ship could cost between $14 billion and $22 billion, depending on when construction begins and what systems are included. Other analysts have placed the estimate at around $13.5 billion for the first ship, which would make it roughly as expensive as a Ford-class aircraft carrier. Think about that. For the cost of one DDG-1 battleship, the Navy could buy 4 or 5 Arleigh Burke destroyers, or 2 Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines, or a significant number of unmanned surface vessels. Mark Kansian at the Center for Strategic and International Studies wrote a detailed analysis arguing that the ship will never actually be built. His reasoning? It will take years to design. It will cost around $9 billion per ship in a best case, and it contradicts the Navy's own distributed operations concept, which envisions spreading firepower across many smaller platforms rather than concentrating it on a few large ones. His blunt prediction: a future administration will cancel the program before the first ship ever hits the water. Then there's the strategic vulnerability argument. China's military analysts were quick to respond to the announcement. A researcher at the PLA Naval Military Academic Research Institute pointed out that a 35,000-ton ship loaded with munitions is simply a bigger target. China has specifically developed anti-ship ballistic missiles, the DF-21D and the even more capable DF-26, designed to hit large surface ships from over 1,000 miles away. These are sometimes called carrier killers. The argument goes, in an era of precision-guided anti-ship missiles, putting this much capability on a single hull is the modern equivalent of putting all your eggs in one very expensive basket. If an adversary sinks one DDG-1, they haven't just destroyed a ship. They've eliminated $22 billion of capability and hundreds of lives in a single strike. There's also the industrial base problem. American shipyards are already struggling to deliver current orders on time. The submarine production line is behind schedule. The frigate program just had to be restarted from scratch after the Constellation class was canceled. Adding an entirely new class of enormous, technologically complex warship could strain the already stressed shipbuilding industrial base beyond its capacity. Only 3 shipyards in America could potentially build the DDG-1: Bath Iron Works in Maine, Ingalls Shipbuilding in Mississippi, and Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia. All 3 are already busy with existing programs. The railgun risk is particularly concerning. The Navy spent over $500 million on railgun development before shelving the program. Bringing it back and making it work reliably at sea on a pitching, rolling warship is a massive engineering challenge. If the railgun fails, the DDG-1 loses one of its headline capabilities, and the justification for the ship's enormous size and cost becomes harder to defend. And there's a historical pattern that worries many defense analysts. The last time the Navy attempted a radical new ship design, it was the Zumwalt class. Originally planned as a 32-ship class, it was cut to just 3 ships. Costs ballooned from an estimated $1.5 billion per ship to over $4 billion each. The advanced gun system it was designed around turned out to fire ammunition that cost roughly $800,000 per round, so expensive that the guns were never even loaded with their intended projectiles. Before the Zumwalt, there was the littoral combat ship. It was supposed to be a cheap, modular, fast vessel that could swap mission packages for different roles. Instead, it was plagued by mechanical failures, structural cracks, and capability shortfalls. Ships are being decommissioned decades before their intended service life, and the Constellation-class frigate, just canceled after years of design changes, cost overruns, and schedule delays. The Navy is starting over with a new frigate based on the Coast Guard's national security cutter. Every single one of these programs started with bold promises, ambitious technology goals, and confident timelines. Every single one ran into serious problems. The DDG-1 is making even bolder promises with even more ambitious technology. But history also offers a counterpoint. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer was considered an ambitious and risky design when it was first conceived in the 1980s. Critics said it tried to do too much. The Aegis combat system it carries was cutting-edge and unproven. There were concerns about cost and complexity. Today, with over 70 ships built and more coming, the Arleigh Burke-class is arguably the most successful surface combatant program in modern naval history. It's the workhorse of the fleet, deployed worldwide, continuously upgraded, and still highly capable after more than 3 decades. Sometimes bold bets pay off. The question is whether the BBG-1 is more like the Burke or more like the Zumwalt. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger strategic picture. The BBG-1 isn't being developed in isolation. It's part of the Golden Fleet Plan, a vision for a significantly larger and more capable Navy. The 2026 defense budget allocates $47.3 billion for 19 new ships, which is the most ambitious naval procurement in recent memory. The budget includes 2 Virginia-class submarines, 1 Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, 3 medium landing ships, and the new frigate class. This comes at a time when the Navy is simultaneously engaged in active combat operations against Iran in Operation Epic Fury, maintaining a deterrent posture against China in the Western Pacific, and dealing with a shipbuilding industrial base that's behind schedule on multiple programs. The Navy currently operates about 287 battle force ships. The Golden Fleet Plan envisions growing that number significantly, though exact targets have shifted as plans evolve. The design phase for the BBG-1 is expected to run from 2026 to roughly 2031 or 2032. Construction of the first ship could begin in the early 2030s. If everything goes according to plan, and that's a very significant if, USS Defiant could be operational somewhere in the mid-2030s. The Navy says it will use artificial intelligence to help accelerate the design process. That's sensible, given the power of modern computational tools. But AI is not magic. Complex naval architecture still requires years of engineering work, testing, and validation. The physics of building a 35,000-ton warship don't change because you have better computers. A key development to watch is the Navy's promise to clarify the design requirements and set a schedule within 60 days. This will tell us whether the BBG-1 is being developed as a derivative of the DDG-X design, which could speed things up significantly, or as a completely new clean sheet design, which would take much longer and cost much more. Here's what I think matters most about this story, regardless of whether you support or oppose the battleship concept. The BBG-1 represents a fundamental question about the future of naval warfare. Should the Navy concentrate its most powerful weapons on a few very large, very expensive platforms? Or should it distribute those weapons across many smaller, cheaper platforms that are individually less capable but collectively harder to defeat? The Distributed Operations Camp says, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Build more Burkes, more frigates, more unmanned vessels. Spread out. Make it impossible for the enemy to cripple your force with a few lucky shots. The Concentration Camp, and I use that term purely in the military strategy sense, says, some missions require concentrated power, a command ship, a weapons truck, a platform that can generate enough electrical power for next-generation weapons. You can't distribute a railgun across 20 small boats. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and the answer may depend on which adversary you're preparing to fight, in which ocean, under what circumstances. What's certain is that the BBG-1 debate will shape U.S. naval strategy for decades to come. Whether USS Defiant is ever built or not, the questions it raises about fleet composition, weapons technology, and the role of large surface combatants will define how the Navy evolves. I'll be covering every major update on this program, from design decisions to budget battles to technology milestones. Subscribe if you want to follow along. See you in the next one.